Hi everyone. In this lesson, we're going to examine the symbolic interactions perspective and apply it to discrimination and prejudice. Remember that this sociological model focuses on how notions of race, ethnicity, gender, and age are socially created, and how labels impact our perceptions and produce prejudice. Specifically, the model emphasizes two things. Number one, how is prejudice learned? And secondly, the labeling process associated with stereotyping, which can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, by way of approach, we'll focus on some key aspects associated with this model. You can find these on pages 10 and 11 in your second study guide. There's also good information in chapter 9 in the textbook. But let's take a look at some of the elements that are involved here. The first being ideologies. Remember again, ideologies are sets of ideas and beliefs. In this case, they're used to justify domination, provide norms and values that explain or prescribe the differential treatment of some groups and categories of people. We've looked at several of these. Do you remember them? Manifest destiny, the cult of domesticity or true womanhood. Another is sexism, the belief that one sex is inferior to another, and as a result, unequal treatment of that sex is justified. And as is the case of most ideologies, sexism is, to a degree, supported by religious beliefs and ideas. For example, there are passages in the Quran as well as in the Bible that support the notion, and I might add with respect to the Bible, this applies to not only the Old Testament but to the New Testament as well, specifically the teachings of Paul, that women are inferior to men. Furthermore, another element that figures into this are derogatory words that are applied to various categories and groups of people, suggesting that they have some sort of negative or questionable qualities or traits. These might include slurs. On the other hand, they might bring into play, again, negative implications. For example, some of you might have heard phrases made by others that suggest that certain ethnic categories are by their very nature stingy and deceitful. For example, you ever been accused of being an Indian giver? On the other hand, have any of you gone on a date? Dutch? Have you tried to Jew someone down? Or have you complained about the fact you got gypped? Or this person welched on a bet? If you think about these, you can recognize the ethnic categories and how they are put in a negative context. At the same time, take a look at negative definitions of everyday words. There are two in particular that I want you to give some consideration to: white and black. Which of the two, again, is associated with some of the following meanings? Soiled, dirty, evil, hostile, disgraceful, gloomy. If you guess black, you're right on. On the other hand, take it one step further. Are you the black sheep of the family? Do you have any black marks? Have you ever been blackballed or blacklisted? Furthermore, there are people, even today, that distinguish in their mind between what's called black magic and white magic. Which of the two do you think is more positive, used for good purposes? If you guessed white, once again, you're correct. Also, you want to take into account the impact of labeling. Labels can be used to highlight racial, ethnic, gender, and age differences. These don't have to be, and it's important you remember this, either written or spoken. Not that many years ago, the American Sign Language for the Deaf relied on visual, stereotypic representations as signs for some ethnic categories. For example, Japanese involved twisting a finger near the edge of the eye. Jewish or Jews were often referred to in this way, stroking an imaginary beard. Okay, African Americans, you depressed your nose and flattened it out. All of these are highly negative in nature as such. And you want to remember that a considerable amount of this is driven by or influenced by stereotypes. So go over to page 11 of your second study guide, and I've included some information about stereotypes. Remember again that we're talking about something that's an exaggerated, distorted generalization or image of another group or category of people. It's held by one group and applied to another group or a category. It acknowledges no individual variations. It carries with it clearly the implication that everyone is this way. Now, stereotypes figure into it, and some of the things that we've already discussed. For example, one thing I did not mention earlier, more or less again, go back for just a moment to page 10, to words, negative definitions associated with words. You want to remember that there's certain words out there that have a positive connotation, but once again, they kind of fit into stereotyping. Native American, Asian American, Latino or Hispanic. These are terms that reference varieties of people that may share some attributes, but whose traditions and lifestyles are quite different from one another. It just lumps everybody together. That's what stereotypes tend to do. Also, quickly, one other word I wanted to mention, discovered. Widely used in history textbooks. Some of you might remember from your own primary or middle school or even high school experience. It's terms that are slowly but surely being removed from a lot of history textbooks, but it often applies to European explorers. They discovered America, they discovered this, they discovered that. And that means they found something that was previously unknown. It completely overlooks the fact that, true or false, when it comes to North America, weren't there people already living there and had been for a long period of time? Yet again, Europeans, quote unquote, discovered them. Now, with respect to stereotyping, one of the things I want you to remember is exactly why do we tend to accept stereotypes in an uncritical fashion? Well, there are three factors to examine and to give some serious consideration to. Stereotypes, again, tend to relate to how our minds work, how our brains operate, if you will. We tend to, again, lump people and experiences into categories. It makes it a little bit easier. The problem is, however, stereotypes often distort reality. And as I mentioned a moment ago, once they're applied to a group or category of people, that fits everybody within that group or category. For example, do you know how to tell a businessman from a businesswoman? Well, a businessman is aggressive. A businesswoman is pushy. He stands firm, but she is hard. His judgments are her prejudices. He exercises authority diligently, but she is power mad. He is a stern taskmaster, but she is hard to work for. He climbed the ladder of success. She slept her way to the top. Do you see the stereotypes? And there are others that figure into this as well. And often these stereotypes have a humorous element to them, such as these two photographs. Can you pick it up? Redneck birthday cake. Check out the brand, Pabst Blue Ribbon. And then redneck body work. Or what about this one? redneck funeral? Or do you pick up the stereotype here? If you're having any difficulty reading this, it's Smokey the Bear. And he's saying, remember, only you can prevent, wait a sec, I'll think of it. And the two campers to the right, one turns to the other and says, Smokey just turned 65. I think you can pick up the stereotype there. Or from The Wizard of Oz, one of my favorite cartoon strips. Do you pick up the stereotype here? If you recognize it, you'll know there is still a stereotype out there that police officers like donuts. On the other hand, how about this one? This is the football player's entrance exam to big state university. Okay? On the first hand, you've got to find the word. Can you pick it out? Also, here you have to make your way through the maze. There's the start, there's the finish. Can you complete this not completed drawing? And which of the two is larger, a watermelon or a lima bean? And then it gets really difficult down at the bottom. Can you find the aardvark hiding in the pickup truck? And can you connect the dots? You all do recognize, don't you, the stereotype here. Anybody who's an athlete is dumb. Now, you most likely too have become familiar with blonde jokes. If someone, particularly a woman, screws up, well, she's being a little blonde. What about this one? The blonde calls her boyfriend and says, please come over here. I have a killer jigsaw puzzle and I just can't figure out how to get started. Her boyfriend asks, well, what's it supposed to be once finished? The blonde responds, well, according to the picture on the box, it's a tiger. So her boyfriend decides to go over to her apartment and help her with the puzzle. She lets him in, shows him where she spread the puzzle all over the table. He studies the pieces for a moment. Then he looks at the box and turns to her and says, first of all, no matter how hard we try, we're never going to be able to assemble this in anything resembling a tiger. He then takes her by the hand and says, second, I want you to relax. Let's have a cup of coffee, and then, with a sigh, let's put all of the pieces of the frosted flakes back in the box. Now, if you laughed at any of these, keep in mind that the stereotype is more or less entrenched. Now go back and wrapping up to what you find on page 10 in your study guide. Link this to stereotyping. Highlight again selective perception, compartmentalization, and the so-called contact hypothesis. This is very important. If we hold stereotypes, we work very hard to find anything that will justify the stereotype. It doesn't have to be much. It can be, for example, just a teeny little bit. No more than just that. And then we say, I told you so, I told you so. If we can't find any person that belongs to a group or a category that we've stereotyped, any of the characteristics of the stereotype, do we rid ourselves of that stereotype? Do we drop it? What do you think? If you give a little bit of thought to that, I think most of you would agree, no, we just make that person an exception to the rule. Well, for a dizzy-headed blonde, she's pretty smart. For poor white trash, he's done pretty well for himself. See where I'm coming from? Plus, once we begin to employ stereotypes, you want to remember again that stereotyping allows us to do certain things, nasty maybe in nature, and we come away feeling good about ourselves. This is, again, a very important aspect to remember about stereotyping. It's called compartmentalization, the ability to separate our actions from our sense of being good and moral. If you want to put it in another way, some people are not troubled if they consider and treat the members of another category or group very badly, even viciously, largely because of the fact that In the end, they feel like they haven't done anything wrong. They've been able to separate. I'll emphasize that very strongly. They've been able to separate their actions from their sense of morality. Some studies were done on guards in concentration camps after the end of World War II. In their jobs, these men were cruel, vindictive, and vicious. Yet they were loving and caring fathers and spouses. Some of us do the same thing. We leave our work persona at work hanging on a coat rack. We're a different person away from work. In this case, we can do awful things to other people and still feel good about ourselves. Now, some symbolic interactionists argue that one of the best ways to reduce discrimination and prejudice is engage in the contact hypothesis. Bring people together. And this interaction, once folks get a chance to know one another, can perhaps reduce prejudices and misunderstandings. Just bringing people together from diverse backgrounds, that alone is not going to do the deed. Jerry Springer and other shock type hosts on various TV shows do this all the time. They'll bring in people from really diverse backgrounds and set it up in such a way they're going to end up fighting. So for this to work, the groups and categories have to be on an equal footing. It's good that they are pursuing or seeking the same goal, because that's going to produce a degree of cooperation. And last but not least, both parties or groups or categories need to receive not negative feedback but positive feedback. If these elements are entrenched or established, the contact hypothesis, again, can be, in many respects, a positive step, a way of reducing discrimination and prejudice. In the end, what's the policy implications of the symbolic interactions approach? Well, it's pretty straightforward. If prejudice is socially constructed and learned, it can be reconstructed and unlearned. Until next time.